Well, it's the 5th-year anniversary of the Miracle on the Mon. If you're a Riverhounds fan, you probably already know that, but we're going to take this chance, myself and John Krysinsky, to talk about it. I am Matt Gajtka. He's John Krysinsky. This is Pittsburgh Soccer Now, and the content has been flowing a lot slower than we thought it would be here in the spring
Absolutely.
of 2020, John. But, hey, a great excuse to look back with the 5-year anniversary and also with you putting together your new book. So what was the process behind wanting to do something like this, and how have you brought that into fruition here?
Yeah, to be honest with you, a few days after this incredible match, the Miracle, I called it the Miracle on the Mon after my game story. And
Yeah,
a few
very
days,
astutely. You were all over that nickname right from the start.
yeah, I just well, there's a little story behind it in the book, but yeah, I mean, that name came to me right away as soon as after the match ended, and then a few days later, I wrote a long form piece for my website. At the time was Pittsburgh Soccer Now. I'm sorry, Soccer Report, which has since become Pittsburgh Soccer Now. And it was, I think at the time, I wanted to, even the game was so remarkable, I felt like it needed some extra maybe just really create something that carried the emotion of the night. And then as the years have gone on and the Steel Army has, I always look at them and kind of gauge to see how people feel about certain moments in the history of the club of the Riverhounds. And there's just such an affinity for that moment. And then I'm talking to obviously players, who had players like Rob Vincent and Danny Earls and Kevin Kerr in particular. And that's where the narrative kind of revolves around. It's not solely around those three, but since they were had prominent moments, came up biggest in that match, and not to diminish anybody else's contributions, but just having a lot of access to those three guys and being able to talk to them in detail about the match, and obviously the backstory of the Riverhounds organization. And it's just that, part of the emotion at that night, I think we all felt, was that, a year before that, the organization it could have all been over at the end of the 2014 season as they headed into the bankruptcy proceedings. So that, and just looking back, and at that time it was a 15-year journey for the organization, and see where they, about 15 years, and see, how far they came, but they were still like looking for that signature moment. And I think everybody who was there that night and was part of the organization, I think, felt that was it. So that, to me, that was a story to tell. And as since the 5 years have gone by, it's become more and more clear that was a story that needed to be told in a longer format. And so that's, the idea came about a couple of years ago. Could never really get it off the ground, but this winter I made it my purpose to at least get it started and hopefully have it done by the 5th anniversary, and here we are, with the quarantine as well, of 2 months. It's strange. I can't say that it's helped or hurt. It's just because it's been such an odd time.
Yeah, I feel the same way about my life in general. Has it helped me? Has it hurt me? Personally, career-wise, I don't know. But at least in this case, it does give us a chance to really nail it down, because otherwise we'd be preparing for a Riverhounds match this week, possibly a U.S. Open Cup match as well midweek, which in fact was the prelude to the Miracle on the Mon, which I was reminded when I looked back and I was helping you edit this book. And I do like how you put the Miracle on the Mon as a game itself, as a 90-minute sporting activity, was spectacular, but also you have the fact that the Hounds had just secured a matchup against DC United in the U.S. Open Cup 3 days prior at Highmark Stadium with the win against Tampa Bay, also on a late Rob Vincent goal there. And also, as you brought up too, the bankruptcy proceedings of 2014, the fact that the team moved into Highmark Stadium in 2013. So apparently the franchise was in its ascendancy then, but then just a year later, coming crashing down, at least on the financial side, and really needing to get, a lifeline from Tuffy Schallenberger and his crew as well. And also trying to build that momentum on the field too. So it wasn't just about the 90 minutes. You could have written a book just on the 90 minutes, but that's what I liked about it in some of the chapters that I've seen and helped edit, is that there is a larger context here. And in a lot of ways, you could say the Hounds wouldn't be where they are today in a much better spot, coronavirus notwithstanding, but in a much better spot than they were 5 years ago, and especially 6 years ago, because of all these events that you write about in the book.
Yeah, and you know, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, right? So, and this organization, I mean, starting and we go back. I mean, we go back. There's a little bit of history of soccer in Pittsburgh included as well, because, you know, again, that backstory I just felt like that was important. A lot of people might be reading this for the first time who are local and from Pittsburgh. There could be a lot of people reading this for the first time that are soccer fans in and around the United States and even abroad. I mean, obviously Robbie, Kevin, and Danny are all, you know, have roots overseas, and Danny's overseas now. And I think there's going to be a little bit of interest in a number of different areas. I hope people will want to read this book and learn more about the story of a second division soccer club in the United States during such a transitional time. I mean, there's no doubt that this is a period of transition. And there's been, you know, soccer's had such an interesting history in the United States. It kind of come and goes, and, you know, there's been different times where there's been more interest than others. And there's, you know, we go back 100 plus years, and there's a lot of immigrants and a lot of people were playing the game, but it kind of went away again. And, you know, so it's gone back and forth. There's a lot of history there. But the thing is, it culminates with this Riverhounds franchise finally being the first long-term proposition in terms of soccer, professional soccer at the highest level in this region. And so this is the story of this organization. And, you know, there's no sugarcoating in this book. We get into the challenges, some of the difficulties, and the ups and downs and through these years. And so that was my goal, was to tell the story as much as I possibly could, and give it, you know, give everybody an idea of what these challenges have been like. And I think that obviously where like you said, where the organization is today, I think shows that they persevered, if anything.
Well, you told us about some of the characters in the book, and I also want to mention, before we get any deeper into the story and some of the fun things, we don't want to give away a ton here because we want people to buy the book, but we are going to dig into some of our favorite parts of that game in particular in just a moment here. But how can people purchase the book? How can they buy it? Where can they find it?
Well, it'll be available on Amazon. So that's the primary place. Goal has been, and release date is going to be on the 5th anniversary. So May 30th. And so we will put more information out on Saturday morning with links to how you can purchase the book. I don't have it set up at the moment because there's a few tweaks, final last minute things that are going into and creating it. There will also be an ebook version available. I can't guarantee that it'll be ready on Saturday, but the paperback version will be, by all indications, should be ready to go. Green light on Saturday, so we'll have that posted on the 5th anniversary, and that'll be on Pittsburgh Soccer Now. We'll post that, and we'll continue to keep promoting it, hopefully, and get a lot of coverage and people interested.
Well, and the man wearing the captain's armband for the Hounds that night, Danny Earls, also designed the cover. He is quite an artist. If you follow the Hounds, you might know that already from Danny Earls' social media presence, but I thought that was a really interesting and neat aspect of this book too. So what was his receptivity to your proposal that he get involved from an artistic side of it here?
Yeah, he jumped on it. He was just excited to be invited. And obviously the first thing I wanted to do was talk to him about the game, of course. But it was a natural thing. It was just looking at his artwork and seeing what he's done, you know, for MLS, with some Irish football, and just some things that he's done on the soccer side. But his illustrations he's just such a talented artist, and just some amazing work. I just saw something he did dog portraits yesterday. It just blew me away. It's just very stunning artist. And coming up with a specific image was something we talked about, but I didn't have to give him that much direction. I just said, kind of, this is what I was looking for. This is the story. And being the teammate that he is, I think he felt that Rob Vincent and Kevin Kerr images, he felt strongly about their images, as I did too. But yeah, he felt that they were the probably best representatives for the cover, and being that they scored probably the two most climactic, most exciting goals in that game, and maybe in the history of the Riverhounds franchise. So I think it worked out really well, and it was he was very easy to work with. Great guy. It's interesting because I hadn't interviewed Danny a lot during his time in Pittsburgh, and I was just so glad to be able to work with him on this project and have him do this. It was the first thing that came to my mind, and I'm just so glad it worked out.
Well, yeah, I was blown away by what the cover looks like. It also incorporates the Pittsburgh skyline from the perspective of the South Side, too. Very appropriate considering Highmark Stadium's location. So, well, let's talk more about the game. And you and I have covered a lot of Riverhounds games. We've broadcast a couple of games together as well. But there's only one game in recent memory this decade that has featured more goals by the Hounds scored, and that was just this past autumn in the
Right.
quarterfinal game, the 7-0 wipeout of Birmingham Legion at Highmark Stadium. Other than that, though, the 6 goals scored by the Hounds, all in the second half, mind you, of that May 30th, 2015 game against the Harrisburg City Islanders. That was the biggest Pittsburgh outburst in a solid decade plus in the history of the franchise. So we thought it'd be fun to try to rank those 6 Hounds goals. And if you're having a hard time remembering, just look it up on YouTube. Pittsburgh, Harrisburg 2015. It's the first result. At least it was for me just a moment ago. I actually watched the whole game, John. It's the first time I rewatched the whole thing. And it's always, for me as a broadcaster, especially on the play-by-play, I'm very critical of myself, and I want to make sure I encapsulate the scene perfectly. So there were some cringe moments. This was 5 years ago. I feel like I'm 5 years better right now. But also, I was just living and dying with every twist and turn of that game. So the one problem, though, in ranking the 6 Riverhounds goals is that one of the goals scored by Danny Earls just at the stroke of stoppage time in the second half to make it 5-4 Harrisburg is not recorded anywhere except in the memories of the men who played that game and the folks who were in the stands. So do you even remember that goal? Because I was blocked out by a partition, had my head down. As I said on the broadcast, I didn't even see it, but that might be the best goal of the bunch.
It just might be. I was going to say it's in the top 2, obviously, and so for me, and I saw it as it transpired, but it happened so quickly. It was like, whoa, did that just happen? Like it was a quick throw and off the bounce, and Danny just gets a solid foot on it, and I still don't know how that happened, but and we have some fun with it in the book and in the narrative. And as I know you as you were editing it, I'm glad. I mean, my sense is that I feel like the readers are going to really get excited when they get to those chapters, and there's a certain sense of excitement that I feel when I'm even rereading it, re-editing, and continuing to kind of carve out the narrative. It's again, in written form, sometimes when you relive something, there's a sense of excitement that comes back, and I think that's the piece that I enjoyed the most about this book. And so so when you look back at the goals, we can quickly go through them. The first goal at the beginning of the second half, the Hounds are down 3-0. By the way, again, not giving anything away. There's some really interesting stuff that happened at a halftime, especially on the Riverhound side. So that will be in the book. But they come out charging, and they get a goal within 2 minutes, and it's a simple, I think, cross in the box from Lebo Maloto to Rob Vincent. He hammers it home, and then the second goal just a few minutes later to make it 3-2. Amari Suma, who was a second half sub, And back then the USL. This will be one of our topics we can cover in this piece. Where he was one of 5 subs, so you can't do that nowadays. And but he gets I believe it was Miro Cabrillo lofted a ball to him. He headed it, and Nick Noble, the keeper from Harrisburg, comes out a little bit too far off his line. It goes over Noble's head into the goal. So that's 3-2. Then Harrisburg gets another one. It kind of stays 4-2 for a while, and then everything gets crazy, and there's a scrum in front of the goal. Then Lebo Moloto is fouled by Noble, and that creates the penalty kick. And so then, again, it's not just an ordinary penalty kick. Kevin Kerr is saved by Noble, but then Danny Earls comes in and knocks it home, and was a pretty brilliant play by Earls there. And then, of course, the goal you described, where we're literally in the 90th, 10 seconds, 89 minutes and 50 seconds. Danny Earls, the ball comes to him after going out of bounds. Amazing volley, rocket shot into the upper 90. At that point, it's 5-4, but they're into stoppage time. And then, of course, the 2 goals in stoppage time, which, Rob Vincent off. The ball's rolled to him off the free kick, and then the finisher with the give and go, and just Lebo Moloto gets the ball in the box, and all of the Harrisburg defenders come to him, but then he plays it back to Kevin Kerr for, again, not a super easy shot, having to slide it past Noble. So I think just storybook type goals, the way that whole thing built up. But for me, I would take Rob Vincent's free kick. That's my number one. I don't know. What do you think, Matt?
Yeah, that's got to be 1 or 2 for me. I feel like the second Earls goal and the Vincent free kick. We saw that from Rob so many times that year, and I just rewatched it a few loops over and over again before we did this show. And there's not a lot of room there for him to thread that through. He's got to beat a couple of guys on the flank of the Harrisburg wall. And Noble actually reads it pretty well, but it's just struck so well and so perfectly placed that there's nothing he could have done. I don't think Tim Howard in his prime could have done anything about that one. So,
I don't think Plastic
Vincent,
Man or Elastic Man or wherever, that Avenger is for
right.
superheroes could reach that. I mean, it was just, it was unstoppable. And Noble said, well, but again, Noble gives his thoughts in the book as well. Again, I don't want to give too much away, but he gives his thoughts on his, in the book, which is great. I was really happy to have not just the Riverhound perspective, but also the City Islanders perspective in the book. And so we talked to Nick Noble and, Neil Schaefer. This kind of flew under the radar for a number of years, even during that time, that Neil Schaefer was a former Riverhound, grew up in in Beaver County and Aliquippa area, and went to Robert Morris, and it was a pretty good pro there. And his contributions to the book are fantastic. And, now, he's even still playing today with the Tartan Devils, but the amateur club in the Greater Pittsburgh Soccer League. But there's so many wonderful contributions and input and feedback. But yeah, I think that goal, to me, and the fact is, it wasn't, and I said off a free kick, it was really rolled to him. It wasn't a dead ball hit. So it wasn't a high percentage shot, if you will, to use a basketball expression.
No, but the way he was going that season, and even in that game he had just scored to start the second half, I think it would be difficult to criticize Rob for the choice to take that. I also want to give a shout. You mentioned Suma's goal. I think Suma, assuming he intended to flick that one overhead and try to put it on goal, I think that is definitely a top 3 out of the 6 at the very least. Vincent's first one, you probably could argue that Harrisburg should have covered that a little bit better. It trickled into the net. The rebound goal from Earls on the penalty kick, yes, he struck it well, but it wasn't that terribly far from Noble. I think he was more shocked that no one marked up on Earls there. So you can go back and watch. You can go back and watch and make your own call.
Well, I agree with that. I do think that Earls, just that instinct to beat, to get to that ball first, and it was phenomenal. And I said, like, putting that 4th out of 6 or 5th out of 6 in this group is is saying something, because it was just one amazing goal after another.
Well, let's talk about the unsung heroes, both sides, really, because I find myself looking back at that, especially in the first half. Harrisburg was on a run coming into that game. They were 4-0-1 after the Hounds smacked them on opening night 5-2. So they were going pretty well. They had just been knocked out in the U.S. Open Cup that previous Wednesday by the Rochester Rhinos. Bob Lilly will be mentioned here later on in this show, but at that time he was coaching the Rhinos, of course. And that was the big year for the Rhinos, where they barely allowed anything and just lost once all season. But neither here nor there. But
it's in the book.
Exactly. We'll get more into that
in the book. Yeah.
But unsung heroes, Lebo Milotto had 3 assists for the Riverhounds. I believe that's still a club record, or at least has maintained a tie for a club record for a single game. And I was saying during my commentary on the broadcast, so were Paul Child and Gene Klein, they thought that was Lebo's best game of the year. That was his rookie year as a pro in America. He had played small college ball, had played some in the PDL, but this was his first go-around in the USL. And as an attacking midfielder, just the composure he has to make that final pass to Kerr on the winning goal is amazing in and of itself. But I felt like he was driving their attack. Okay, we had interruption in internet service at my house, power outage. Hey, it happens, I guess. Severe weather this time of year is pretty commonplace. John, you were about to talk about your unsung heroes for the game, so go ahead with that.
Yeah, I wanted to mention Ryan Hewlings. I know it's easy to pick on the goalie that gave up 5 goals, but this guy, I mean, he started his first ever pro match was in the Open Cup, I think about 2 weeks before that, against the West Virginia Chaos. And then the Riverhounds had 2 goalkeeper injuries. They had a 30-year-old experienced goalkeeper at that time, Brian Thompson. Then they started Callie Brown. I think his first start ever was in a road win at Richmond, or home tie at Richmond, one of those Richmond games. But both of them got nicked and both were hurting, and Mark Steffens had no choice but to start Hewlings in the Tampa Bay Open Cup match, which he got a shutout, and he worked well. The defense played really good that match. The next match, obviously, is the Miracle on the Mon, and he is under enormous pressure the entire first half. He makes 5 saves, gives up 3 goals, but those 3 goals were mostly not his fault. I mean, they were defensive lapses and breakdowns, and so the Hounds are down 3-0. Granted, I think the second half, some of those goals, but as I was talking previously, I think before we were interrupted, but the pace of those matches between Harrisburg and Pittsburgh they're just furious, and both teams wanted to play that way. They both wanted to get forward, and both wanted to leave a few things open in the back, maybe sometimes take chances. And we saw that Ryan, under pressure in the first half, did a pretty good job under the circumstances. So in a weird way, the keeper that gave up 5 goals and that was, probably had a rough go of it in the second half, I still say is an unsung hero, because that it could have been much worse, maybe. And that's hard to believe. And then
8 shots on target for Harrisburg in the first half. It was actually scoreless game through 30 minutes, which in a game that's tied for the highest scoring game in league history still to this day, that is also difficult to believe. So the last 60 minutes contained all 11 goals.
Yeah, just crazy stuff. I mean, and so I thought he helped. I mean, considering his experience, I think he did fine. And then just hats off to as I mentioned, Mark Steffens did a pretty good job of bringing in subs when needed. I think, and those guys in the second half, I think, gave the energy, gave the legs. Like one guy, Anthony Vergara, who didn't play a whole lot that season, but played the full second half. He came in as a left, I believe, as a left back.
For Tyler Pasher.
Minutes. Yeah, for Tyler Pasher, right? A talented young player, but Vergara he seemed like a steadying force back there. He was pushing forward late in the match. He had a lot of, he just did some good things. So shout out to the local guy. I think he, contributed. And that was a good thing to see. And obviously, the full complement of the midfield, we can't underestimate. I mean, you mentioned Lebo Moloto and Danny Earls. You know, Danny Earls is just so often is holding things, keeping, staying in front of that back line and doing a great job just as a defensive midfielder. But for him to come through with some goals, and I often say that he really is underappreciated, especially in this match. And just as a player, here he comes through when when we least expected it, really. I mean, that volley, and then of course the PK goal, which we were raving about before.
You brought up the disorganization in the back for both of these teams in this game, and also just the freewheeling approach to the sport that both clubs had that season in the 4 matchups in the Keystone Derby Cup, the first year of the Keystone Derby Cup. I know we wanted to talk about how this game has aged, how it compares to what we see in the USL today. And I just know from watching the past 2 seasons of Riverhounds soccer, this feels like a totally different universe. We're used to extreme organization, extreme cohesion, especially in the defensive third for the Riverhounds. And it was eye-opening for me to remember that season. And no offense to Mark Steffens, I think he played the hand that he was dealt, and he realized, well, we have some more offensive firepower than we have stability on the back, so we're just going to push forward and play to our strength in that way. But it's a totally different approach to the game, and a much more volatile approach to the game. And I couldn't help but think one of the questions that you asked, you put together a little outline for this, and you wanted to touch on some points. You mentioned, or you were wondering, what would this game look like if Bob Lilly were coaching the Riverhounds? And
that's one
I think
of
the
our
Hounds,
what ifs. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think the Hounds probably don't get behind 3-0. They might get behind 1-0 because they didn't have much in the first half in terms of legs, a couple of chances, but you could tell they were the slower team to the ball for sure in the first half. But it doesn't take 6 goals to win if Bob Lilly is coaching the Hounds in this one. I can safely say that.
No, I will have to say this. I don't want to jump too far off the tangent, but Bob Lilly teams have this ability late in matches to turn it up if they have to. I saw that before the Hounds, before he was a coach here. When he coached in Rochester, they just had that ability to just turn things up a notch if they had to. And then we saw it come to fruition a few times in his tenure as a coach of the Hounds.
Yeah, and so for me, the game is a little less wild, but I think at the same time, I think the rhythms of that game are probably playing out in a similar fashion. The Hounds are coming off that huge Open Cup win. The Islanders are trying to prove something and also feeling pretty good about their form in the USL. Anything else about that game that strikes you as emblematic of that era of USL soccer? I think just for me, there are some plays and maybe a couple of the goals that I feel like wouldn't go in that would be covered better these days. I just think the talent level overall is higher. I'm not sure that's a very controversial point. It's now a 2nd division league. Back then it was a 3rd division league. But at the same time, that added to the fun, some of that disorganization, some of the goals that went in that maybe wouldn't go in the modern era of the USL Championship, at least.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I remember way back then when USL and USL Pro, even before that, as it was the same league, was considered when compared to the NASL, which was really 2nd division at that time, was more younger players, more freedom to express themselves, that type of thing. Whereas the NASL was considered a little bit more physical. I remember I've interviewed somebody like Hunter Gilstrap or Willie Hunt, who played in both, and that was their feedback. I remember specifically that more veteran players in the NASL. So I think that there's some validity to that. I think Bill Becker's, but it was sort of like the Hounds, Harrisburg, Keystone Derby. It was sort of the perfect storm, if you will, the perfect storm of Bill Becker's style, Mark Steffens realizing he has what he has, and he's especially early in that season realizing what he had and played a certain way, played that 4-2-3-1, and they were getting forward, and there were defensive lapses. But if you recall, and we go into this a little bit in the book, is as that season went on and the Hounds went through a roller coaster. At the very end, Callie Brown stepped up, was at I thought an all USL caliber goalkeeper at the end of that season, and the back line, I think they figured it out. They did Willie Hunt and Anthony Arena and Okiyama and, those guys figured it out, and they had veteran presence on the outside backs. I mean, they brought Matt Dahlman back there because the midfield was so stacked. Steffens didn't know what to do with Matt Dahlman. He was USL assist leader 2 years before that, broke the league record. I mean, so, and he was on and off with injuries. So Steffens had, by the end of the season, I think they had started to figure it out, but they never really did, and hence they lost the playoff match. But yeah, they really started to figure it out at the end. But
a couple more topics before we wrap this thing up. And again, John Krysinsky joining me, Matt Gajtka, here on Pittsburgh Soccer Now and Pittsburgh Sports Live as well, talking about the Miracle on the Mon. If you don't know about it, look it up, or better yet, buy John's book and read it, because he's going to dig into the prologue, the meat of the game itself, and also some of the aftermath. Well, speaking of aftermath of a couple of these goals late, two of the best celebrations I've seen. Both Rob Vincent and Kevin Kerr end up sprinting toward the corner. I thought Kevin Kerr actually ran off the pitch. I wouldn't have blamed him, in fact, because how could you follow that up in a George Costanzaism? He's just going to say, "I'm out," and he's going to walk off the stage. But I think Kevin Kerr got a yellow card for taking his shirt off, but it's the most deserved and most easily dismissed yellow card, I think, in the history of the Riverhounds. That's what sums it up for me. And the image on the front of your book, Danny Earls, a couple of celebrations, Vincent and Kerr, two guys just totally lost in the moment. You can tell they are celebrating with part joy, but also part disbelief, kind of like how we all were in the stands watching that one.
Yeah, I mean, I was just trying to keep up, it's like you're working, you're trying to cover a game, you're tweeting, you're just all this stuff is going on. And for the first time, obviously, and I go into Europe, we use quotes from you and from Gene in the booth, and everybody's emotion, the Steel Army fans, and that celebration, everybody ran to that corner, and it became a thing. I really think that after that, all the years after, anytime the Riverhounds scored on that end, it seemed like whenever there was a big goal, everybody ran to that corner. I don't know if it happened all that much before in that corner, but it became kind of a thing, and it was just I think Kevin's, if you ask me which, rank the celebrations, I mean, when Rob scored his goal, I think Lebo and Kevin just ran behind him in sync. It was, and the photos that the Riverhounds photographers took, would have loved to have a Pittsburgh Soccer Now photographer or someone there at that time. We didn't, but yeah, I mean, still great job by the Hound staff and getting some images from that night. Terrific stuff. And that image of Robbie running towards the sideline too, and Lebo and Kevin right behind him is just priceless. And it just, that should, I mean, I know a lot of people are excited about Danny's cover and that image, and hopefully people will be able to share that, put that on their mantles and whatnot. And, but that image of Kevin and then the image of Robbie both scoring are very iconic. And I think that they do have a place, and I think Pittsburgh soccer fans are always going to remember, and it's a very special moment. And so that's why we're here. That's why we're talking about it 5 years later.
Well, Kevin Kerr, I believe he scored 8 goals that season, usually punctuated by the Archer celebration that we got so used to. There was no Archer there. He was.
I don't have enough room.
Yeah, I can tell. I can tell what you're doing. It was just complete elation, and it was almost like slow motion after he scored it, because he just polished it off so well and almost matter-of-factly just jogged over, and then you could tell the enormity of the moment hit him, and he just went buck wild, and so did the rest of his teammates. And the sprint down the sideline from the home bench wasn't too far. I'm sure none of those guys had a problem meeting Kerr at the corner flag. You also wanted to mention the quote of the night. I was not down there in time to get many quotes after the game. I was at that time still writing about the games as well as broadcasting. Thank goodness I'm not doing that anymore on a regular basis, because it does wear you out. And, I want to make sure I can put the proper punctuation on it in the broadcast booth. But I wasn't down there to talk to Coach Steffens. I know that he mentioned something about whenever Rob Vincent had the ball, he wanted him to shoot. But what else do you remember from the post-game reaction there?
Yeah, well, actually, that's an interesting point, because that quote from Rob Vincent about Rob Vincent was in the game before that.
Oh, okay.
I used that as one of our paragraph titles. I mean, chapter titles. So, but yeah, no. But I thought it was interesting, because there's so much that I was, I had to get information for the story, but I always enjoyed what happened at halftime. So again, read the book, you'll get all the details. And what was interesting was that night, they were very just diplomatic about what happened at halftime. And Mark Steffens, said, something very subtle, like I just kind of let them have it or something. And then I asked Robbie, and that was pretty much the same answer. And it was like, you could see this like smile on Vincent's face. And you knew that something was said in the locker room, but they didn't really want to talk about it. So, but again,
that's the advantage of time passing, right? Now you can get some of that candor. Both guys retired now.
Kevin and Robbie in particular will share that, what happened. But
perfect.
Yeah.
I know it made me smile editing it. I have to say, thank you for giving me an excuse to watch the entire game broadcast again. Like I said at the top of the show, it's the first time I've watched it all the way through in 5 years since the day of the game. So that gave me so much joy and brought a big smile to my face this morning. Also made me melancholy because I wonder, when are we going to be back there again to watch another Riverhounds soccer match? So I'm hoping it's at some point this summer. Of course, right now, late May, we have no idea. All the sports leagues are trying to figure it out. The USL being such a gate-driven league, you have to imagine they're going to be more cautious than most when it comes to returning. But at least we have this, and at least we have your book to go back and help us relive the moment. Or if we weren't there, if you out there weren't there, then you can definitely dig into it and find some greater insight into the trajectory of the Hounds franchise, which no matter where they go from here, John, we can agree that was a major inflection point, and it will be impossible to tell the story of the Riverhounds 20 years in without focusing on the Miracle on the Mon for at least some significant amount of time.
Absolutely. And it's, like I said, this book hopefully is a piece that, just a little piece of that history, and that it gives more people an opportunity to learn more. I mean, hopefully there's a lot of Pittsburgh sports fans that really don't know the whole story about the franchise and the struggles and the ups and downs, and then just having this moment and all of that. So hopefully, my wish is that more people will jump on board and will be interested in soccer in Pittsburgh and hopefully enjoy the read. And that's my goal, is to make sure that it was somewhat entertaining but informative as well, making sure that there's a lot of the historical things, and recover everything the way
well, if nothing else,
5, 6, 7, 8 years of being down at Highmark Stadium, there was just so much there. So I finally put it all together in a book.
Well, I'm glad you did. And if nothing else, this quarantine stay-at-home period has been a good time for sports fans to brush up on their history. So great time for a book to come out, even though we wish that the Hounds were certainly carrying on with their 2020 USL Championship season. But for a great look back, you can find the link to Amazon. That's where John's going to post the link to buy the book. He's also looking to produce an ebook, as he said. But just keep an eye on Pittsburgh Sports, or Pittsburgh Soccer Now, specifically, in fact, PittsburghSoccerNow.com, for all your information on the Miracle on the Mon. John, great to talk to you. I haven't seen your face in a couple of months.
It's been a while. It's great. And I do want to say thank you as well, because you've contributed more than I've even would imagine or would have asked you to contribute. So I appreciate your contributions to the book and your support, and just, it's been great. You yourself and some of our other colleagues at Pittsburgh Soccer Now that contribute have helped as well. And shout out to Mark Goodman, especially too, who's done some editing as well. Just appreciate everybody getting behind it.
Well, your passion is contagious, and I'm attracted to passionate people. That's where I like to hang out with, and John, you're certainly one of those. So thanks again for joining me on this special Zoom podcast, video podcast here. Thanks to the folks at Zoom. They've certainly been propping up the sports industry. And let's sign off with the Archer from Kevin Kerr, the author of The Winning Goal in the Miracle on the Mon. Keep it on Pittsburgh Soccer Now for coverage on the 5th anniversary of this game, and also much, much more as we hopefully look forward to some live soccer down on the South Side this season. For John, I'm Matt, saying good night. God bless. Talk to you next time.